right, well, welcome to Drinks with Her. I am your host, Kate Agnew. Today I have with me Chandra Briggman. Chandra is both a veteran in marketing and product, and she has worked in large companies as well as startups. After completing her MBA at MIT Sloan, she jumped into the media industry and has found two companies, Wide Angle Media and Patronet Magazine. She likes to paint and do photography in her spare time, although she doesn't have much of that anymore now that she has a company. But she also likes to host dinner parties as well. Chandra, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So first, let me thank you for joining me on a Tuesday morning with wine.
With wine.
With wine.
It's my favorite wine, though. So.
It is. Have you? This is a Sauv Blanc.
Yeah.
I prefer like a Marlboro kind because I like the grapefruit flavor.
Well, in the winter I like the reds, but once it starts to warm up,
and
white.
It's a beautiful day now.
65 degrees.
Yes, it's beautiful. So please tell me a little bit more about your current company and where you got the idea for it.
Yeah, so my company is incorporated as Wide Angle Media, and our first venture is Patronet Magazine inside of that company. And so the idea for the magazine was founded out of my experience as an upwardly mobile female executive. And when I started my career, I was always frustrated with not having mentors, not quite knowing where to turn for advice as I navigated my career path. And I got to the place where I was an executive in an organization and realized that I didn't have the right skills to sort of navigate the politics, didn't know who to turn to for advice, didn't have a sponsor, and really just imploded. And so I thought my experience was unique until I actually came to MIT and met with other women in my class who were from around the world, and their experiences were very similar to my experience. And so as I did a lot of research, what I found was that, women's education outpaced men. So we were getting 60% of the bachelor's degrees and 60% of the master's degrees. And we get into the workplace, and somehow mid-career, a lot of us just, flame out. And so I wanted to look more closely at what the reasons were for that. And I thought, let me see if I can blend my interest in media with trying to fill this need in the marketplace for us to have a place to go where we can find advice, find like-minded peers online, but also find products and services that sort of meet our lifestyle needs. Because as I traveled as a professional woman, and I would look at the magazine rack before I got on the plane, there was nothing for me there. I would see mommy media and I would see sexy media, but nothing for the woman who is anchored around how do I make an impact with my career. So Patronet really is my attempt at filling that gap in the media space.
That's fantastic. And that's kind of similar to what made me interested in doing interviews with women.
Yeah.
Is I found that there weren't many examples of women or content that I could consume where it was inspiring women who I could relate to.
Exactly.
I feel like a lot of times you get a really great interview with someone, but they still seem so perfect.
Yeah, I call them supernovas. I mean, it's like you see Marissa Mayer, who's CEO of Yahoo. You see Mary Barr, who's CEO of GM. But it's like, how do you replicate a career path of someone who is like so outstandingly successful? And so Patronet is a combination of, if you took an Inc. magazine, for example, and you found women who are maybe 5 years out or 10 years ahead of you in their career, and think about how do they practically get where they got in their career. So I like to think of Patronet as a blend of Inc. magazine with Vogue. Because what we found was, you look at these cover stories and they're always, celebrities or movie stars, but it's what stories would interest you as a woman who's trying to get into the media space. And so we want to bring that same creative flair that you would see on a Vogue magazine, but we're talking to women who've actually made an impact in business, nonprofit, media, what have you.
I love that so much.
Yep.
I was traveling, actually I was going to Utah for an interview. And I jumped on the plane. I was flying Delta, and they have their Sky magazine.
Yep.
And on the cover, I think it was like CEOs of the airlines.
Right.
And it was a cover full of like 9 men.
Yeah.
I was like, oh.
Yep.
This is a magazine for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was really my motivation for wanting to be in the media space. It is very powerful when you see people who look like you and who share experiences with you as a motivating factor. And, I can remember growing up, the reason why I love photography so much, for example, is that my dad would give us a calendar every year that had this beautiful landscape photography. So I fell in love with the photography. And I was able to convince my mom at a pretty early age to get me a subscription to Elle magazine because I love the beautiful pictures in Elle magazine. And I remember getting my first issue with my name on it. I felt like a celebrity because my name was on the cover. And I flipped through it. It's about this thick. And not one person looked like me in the magazine. And I can chart through my teenage years having magazines like that and reading magazines and not seeing anyone like me, and how my self-esteem, came down over the years. And so I think it's a very, very powerful thing, what media can do in terms of shaping your identity and, how you value yourself. And so that's why media is an important venture for me, and why I wanted to drop out of corporate America and say, this is now what I want to do with the rest of my life. So.
Do you think that media continues today to influence the younger generation in that same way?
Absolutely. I mean, it influences everyone, not just the younger generation. And so the way I like to think about it is, just as, you think about how you've learned how to speak or to walk, it's really about, repeating an activity over and over again. And that's how it becomes permanent in your brain. And so when you're exposed to media, whether you're a teenager, you're a toddler, what have you, what you're essentially doing is programming yourself. And so I think that this is why I had the talk at South by Southwest to talk about how does that sort of constant daily impression with images or with certain messages shape your identity and your behavior. So absolutely, it's very, very powerful. And now that we're seeing more video and more interactive, sort of engaging media that simulates reality, it's more easy to sort of program yourself and condition yourself around a particular image.
Yeah. What can individuals do to influence this and maybe ensure that there's more representatives of every culture, every background in the media?
Well, the good news is technology has made it so easy for any of us to be, media producers, right? I mean, your iPhone has really, really powerful tools on it. And so what I would say is pick up your phone and start creating mini movies. I mean, use the tools out there like YouTube and, all of the social media. We have very, very, and like the Apple products, right? A lot of the tools that are on a basic Apple machine. You're able to create movies. You're able to do photography very well now. And so what I would say is encourage everyone to get out and just produce stuff and put it out there. And don't feel like it has to be perfect. But, a couple of my interns who are Korean, they talk about, okay, there's not any content around the Korean lifestyle. I said, well, pick up your phone and create it. So it's really about, allowing people or motivating people to use the tools that are at their fingertips now and just tell their stories. Tell your story.
Empowering them to do so.
And put it out there, because I guarantee there's someone else out there looking for your story or looking to learn something from your story. So that's my advice.
Yes. You mentioned South by Southwest
I did.
and the talk that you did there. So I've always wanted to go to South by Southwest.
Yeah.
It's on my bucket list. But you actually spoke. You presented at one.
I did.
So what was that experience like? How did you think of the talk? And
It's so many things, because there's tens of thousands of people that descend on Austin all at one time. And there's, South by Southwest is thought of as a music festival, but it is a combination of music and film and arts and sports and entertainment all at once. And so on the one hand, it's pretty overwhelming, but on the other hand, it was very fulfilling for me. Because you're in the midst of the people who are creating the cutting edge. You hear people say, oh, I want to be on the cutting edge. These people are the people who are actually creating the cutting edge. They're creating the next thing for us to catch up to. And so I love being in that environment with so many creatives. And they're using so many different mediums to sort of create really great things. Like as I said, from movies to the next thing in sports or gaming. And so it was a bit overwhelming, because the first year that I actually attended was also the year that I presented. So I had to kind of get used to the culture, but also navigate all of the demands of being a presenter, because South by Southwest, they do a really good job as making sure you're prepared leading up to the event. So it was a lot of preparation. But it was really fulfilling, because as we went through our talk, and the talk we did was, This is Your Brain on Media, Selling or Sabotage. And again, it was really about how does media shape identity and behavior. And what I did was partner with a neuroscientist who could speak to the brain science of what's happening. I spoke more to the psychology and the marketing, and then we also had someone who was from the design thinking space to really help us think about, well, if this is not quite what we want, like how do we think about how we improve media. So it was really good experience, and we got a lot of great feedback that it was one of the most thought-provoking sessions they'd attended, so that made me feel good.
Yeah.
But it really got to the heart of why I want to be in the media space, because, if media can undermine people, right, to get you addicted to something like Cheetos or whatever it may be, it can do powerful things like show you images of women CEOs to the point that you really believe that you can be a CEO one day. So that's really why I wanted to do that session, and I, take pride in that. We did a really good job and got really good feedback, and it was sort of like a kickoff into launching this company, Wide Angle Media.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I watched a lot of crime shows. So, I considered being a CSI detective or going into law.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was done with my undergrad education, I studied math, that I went into technology.
Right.
And I remember loving it. And I even grew up loving technology. I had this fantastic Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen website when I was in 3rd grade.
Yeah.
But I never considered technology as a career.
Right.
And I think a lot of that had to do with not having that representation or that inspiration.
Right.
I thought that people who worked in technology sat in a basement coding, and I couldn't see myself in that position.
Yeah, the image is very powerful. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's actually launching a company in STEM because what she wants to do is expose little girls to STEM early on by embedding it into play, embedding it into entertainment, in much the same way that little boys get exposed to it by putting together toys and robots from Radio Shack, if Radio Shack still exists. I don't know if it still exists, but the idea is to embed it into entertainment and into play in a way that they develop the vocabulary and they develop a comfort around, basic concepts in engineering, so that you feel like, oh, it's not a big deal. I can build X, Y, Z and be an engineer one day. So.
Right.
Yep.
So this is something that I've thought about a lot. A lot of these toys that are now coming into the world to introduce young girls to STEM. Are sometimes pink. And toys that already exist, Legos, for example, should be gender neutral, but today aren't necessarily.
Right.
What do you think about the pink washing of these toys?
Oh gosh, I could go on and on about this. So it's just conditioning, right? It was some marketing ploy many years ago to just decide to choose pink. And label girls as pink and boys as blue, but they actually have nothing to do with anything in biology or in science. And so I think it's very, there's nothing.
I actually really like pink.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was like, is it because society told me so?
Yes, it's conditioning. If you go down any toy aisle, you'll see everything is just sort of washed in pink. It has nothing to do with our brains or anything. It was just totally made up. And as a marketer, I feel ashamed of that, but that's what it was, a marketing ploy. And so, so I think that, yes, it begins to, put kids in a box too early, right? So that little boys don't feel like they get conditioned not to feel comfortable with their emotions or talking about feelings, right? And little girls feel like they should only be talking about dressing dolls and playing house. And so I think you create these limitations very early on, which is why you're seeing some folks launch ventures to sort of break those barriers down and say, play broadly, learn broadly, and be who you want to be, and not, limit kids early on. So.
Absolutely. So do you think you'll ever speak at South by Southwest again? And if so,
Probably.
do you have an idea?
Oh, I have many ideas. But yes, for sure, I would definitely speak at South by Southwest again because I see myself as a very creative person, and I feel like launching Patronet and this platform for women to discover great content, find experts, find products and services is just a beginning. And so I would love to be able to go back and talk about the progress we've made at changing the media space for the better. So absolutely, I envision myself going back to South by.
So you used to work at a large company,
Yes.
and you decided to go into startups. What was that transition like for you as a Black woman?
Yeah.
Did you ever have trouble getting funding or anything like that?
So what I would say is actually I started in the startup space and went to a big company first. So it was more of a cultural shock for me to adjust to the big company, the large enterprise culture first, because I came out of very small, scrappy, startup type companies. And so one of the big differences, and I'll talk about all the dimensions of how they're different, but one of the big differences is, you're in a small company, you typically have purview of a number of different things. When you're in a larger company, you're in these silos, right?
You get one little slice.
You get one little slice, and it requires a different skill set to be able to, develop the right relationships to get one thing done. It reminds me of the three-legged race when I was a kid, where they tied your leg together. You just couldn't just run alone. You had to figure out, how do you navigate this with someone one's tied to your body. And so, so that was a big transition for me. So I was able to bring into this environment, tools about how do you innovate faster, how do you be more nimble and more responsive to the marketplace. And then coming out of that, moving back into the startup space, I've learned how to scale. Like when I've worked for a really large organization that has national footprint, national scope, it's the kind of place most startups want to grow into, right? Unless you're a big unicorn company like Facebook or some of the big guys, you don't know what it feels like to be a national company. So coming out of the corporate environment helps me with that. But what I would say in terms of being a minority female, either in a large corporation or in the startup space, there's certainly going to be hurdles, right? I think that when you think about HR and hiring and building teams, a lot of what you hear is we're trying to find people who fit the company culture or the team culture. And so when you have that kind of pattern matching, you tend to find groups that look very similar. And so then there's this hurdle of convincing people that you have the same capability, you have the ability to produce the same output. And so I have never allowed that to limit me. What I do is I go in and I demonstrate my ability, and those walls come down. And it's not to say that bias doesn't exist, but if I focused on it, then I wouldn't have gotten anywhere in my career. And so what I would say about women or minority women or minorities in general on the startup side raising funding, certainly it's the same thing, right? It's, an investor is saying, we believe in you enough to give you money, to give you our money to actually accomplish a goal. And so again, when you think about pattern matching, when you think about, people have a lot of confidence in folks who resemble people who've been successful before because they're looking at certain traits. And so I think it's easy to say, well, I've not worked with a minority entrepreneur or a female entrepreneur. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do it. I think that no one will say that that's what's happening here, but it's happening, right? Because the stats show that women, for example, only get 2% of investment. So clearly something is wrong. Because I've known a lot of competent women across my career who are, tremendous problem solvers, right? But they don't have the capital or the resources to actually scale their solutions to these problems. And so 2% for women in terms of getting investment and 0.2% for, minority women. So it's, something is going on there. So again, I don't allow that to be a hindrance for me. For example, with Patronet, we have actually not started raising funding yet, but my objective really is to get to know and to speak to my audience, which is professional women, and try to get them to coalesce around our platform and build the audience to a point where if we want to seek investment to scale it, then there is no doubt that we actually have developed something that people are interested in. So I'm not going to focus on, where the shortfalls are in investment. They are there. But what I choose to do is be a part of the solution. So I'm going to build my platform, and one day I actually hope to be an investor myself. And because I understand that women know how to solve other women's problems, and I want to put money behind that one day. So that's the way I can contribute to solving the problem and not being a part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more personally.
Okay.
What was your childhood like? I am so impressed and inspired by you. I kind of want to see what made you who you are.
Well, I have the fortune of being born to a very, very creative mom. I like to think of her as a color outside of the box kind of creative, because she could pick up any medium and just create things. And my siblings and I all agree that it was a little bit perplexing growing up to see one day she wanted to be a florist, so we had all the flower arrangements around because she was decorating, creating all these creative arrangements. It could have been macrame one day, knitting one day. I mean, my mom is just a wild creative. And then on my dad's side, he very analytical, but could build anything. And I found myself as a kid just being a combination of very creative and also one to sort of, be very analytical, like a combination of my mom and my dad. And I can just remember anything I would dream up, I would go to my dad and say, I want to create this, and he would help me make it. And so I remember being in college and told him that I had this wild idea. I wanted to create a talking wall as a puppet. And we sat down and sketched it up, and he kind of thought about it, and he drew it up, went to the garage, and here we had a talking wall before the end of the day. And so that was like what my childhood was like. I lived in books. I loved reading. I had a wild imagination. In fact, I prefer to read books than to watch movies because I could create the characters in my head. So just, I don't know, just a dreamer. Lots of play. I grew up in the South, and because we didn't have a lot of, recreation centers or whatever, we had to create our own entertainment. So it just made me even more creative to have to sit down and create games. And I remember my siblings and I, we would do things like create like a county fair in our backyard. We would actually create games and use Monopoly money, to give out prizes. But just very creative is what I remember. Lots of
Okay.
creativity.
So let's talk more about what you do in your spare time.
Yes.
Do you have
What
spare
time?
time?
No, I
How
don't. I
do you
don't.
manage? How do you function?
Well, so before starting the company, I'll talk about what my spare time looked like. I mean, I've always been very artistic. As I said, my mom was very artistic, so I think that's in my DNA. But it's a way for me to stress relieve. It's a way for me to relax, and so. I remember just going to one painting class, which I thought was a class, but really what it was like open hours for you to come and bring your canvas and paint. I'm like, well, I actually don't know how to paint yet. So I just sat there and I started sketching some things, and the teacher coached me a little bit, and I just started painting. It's just a way for me to express, myself. Photography, again, I'm an introvert, and because I had the experience of having my dad bring in lots of photography in these calendars, I really liked photography, and it was a way for me I wasn't a shy child, but more introverted, for me to interact with the world through a camera. So I was always taking pictures. I was a family photographer. So again, it was a way for me to express myself and connect to people. And I just grew fond of it. And to this day, I still love taking photography. It's a way for me to, when I first moved to New England, a friend and I went out to fall foliage, like up north, and just explored for a whole day with our cameras, just took these awesome pictures, just capturing the beauty of nature. And so it's a way for me to, express myself, relax a little bit. Sometimes I share it with other people, but I just love the arts. Love the arts.
So what are some of your goals for the next 5 years? What do you
5-year
wanna
goals.
do?
So I want Patronet to be, a known brand, at least among professional women in 5 years. I want to go back and speak at South by Southwest in 5 years. Just be successful with the media venture. I really want to see some progress around what's happening in the media space. As you think about the big companies like BuzzFeed, like the new media space is being shaped by, these really, Vice, Vox. And I want to be in that lineup, right? I really want to see a female-founded media company in that lineup because I think we can bring a different sort of thing to the table. So
Absolutely. Well, let me know.
I
if you
will.
get
Maybe
that
maybe we'll be
point.
working together.
You
Who
probably
knows?
will.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
It was
you.
really great speaking with you and getting to know you a bit more.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in. Till next time.